Well, good morning. Thank you for being here. I know it's Friday morning and it feels early to most of you. As Denny mentioned, I'm from the University of Louisiana at Monroe, which is in northeastern Louisiana. I am not anywhere close to New Orleans, which is what everybody knows in Louisiana, right? We're about 4 hours away. But it's a great school. I just started there in August, and it's been fantastic. So I'm happy to be here today. I do want to give you a little bit of an introduction to who I am, since this is my first time presenting or being a clinician at the National Trumpet Competition. I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, which is part of the reason I was gigging in Cincinnati last night. And I went to school just down the road at Morehead State University. Studied with Greg Wing there, who some of you will probably meet. He is a very magnanimous personality. He'll be here, I'm sure, at some point. And if you get a chance to meet him, you should, because the reason I'm standing here is because I studied with him. After Morehead State University, I went on to a graduate degree at Indiana University, where I studied with Joey Tartell, and I was in the studio with a young ruffian right here as well, so it's nice to have friends in the audience. And then after finishing at Indiana, where I also studied with Bill Adam was still alive while I was there, and I took lessons with him, I moved to New York City. And I was there for about 4 years. You name it, I played it. Anything from a Broadway show down to a fireman's parade. I did it all. And it was a blast. It was just absolutely terrifying at first. And then once the ball got rolling, everything was really great. So I loved my time in New York. I loved it so much that after I did my doctorate at the University of Wisconsin, where I also taught jazz trumpet and studied with John Ailey, my wife and I moved back to New York, and we were there for about a year. Again, continuing doing the same exact things I had been doing, playing shows, doing big band gigs. At that point in time, I was also doing a lot of small group jazz that had kind of taken off since I had released an album. And then I was teaching at the United Nations School, which is over on the far east side of the city. And back in May of last year, I interviewed for the job at the University of Louisiana at Monroe, accepted it, and moved down there in August, and I've been there ever since. My wife is still in New York, though. We still have our apartment in New York. She works full-time for the coffee company Nespresso, which I wish I had about 7 cups of coffee this morning, because I got in at about 1 a.m. But that's a little bit, kind of a quick background on me. You can, of course, find out more by probably Googling me. And we all have a supercomputer in our pocket these days, so that makes it very easy to find out a little bit more. But since we're here to talk about the trumpet, which is my favorite subject, I figure I'm going to start with a couple of questions, just some general ideas. Why do you think we warm up? What's the purpose? And don't be shy, don't be reticent. I know it's 9 a.m. I've been up since 6 because I am just a glutton for punishment. But so what are some reasons that we warm up? What do you guys think? Yeah.
To prepare ourselves for the playing that we have to do that day.
That is the exact answer I was looking for. I didn't think I would get it right away. But that's fantastic. Yes, exactly. To prepare ourselves for the day ahead. Or if we don't, let's say all the day ahead really is maybe some, for those of you who are students, maybe some rehearsals or, a lesson or whatever. You might think about your warm-ups in broader periods of time. You warm up each day, but you might think about what you have coming up for the week, and think about planning your warm-up ahead. So you have a concert on Thursday night and it's Monday morning, but you kind of know what you have to do on Thursday night. So you kind of think about what you're preparing in your warm-up throughout the week and how you're going to go about that. I'm also going to talk a little bit later about, I believe there are 2 kinds of warm-ups, so I'll talk about that a little bit later. Now, since we're preparing ourselves for the day, let's now talk about what are the fundamental things that we need to get going when we warm up. What are the fundamental things about trumpet playing? I'm talking base level stuff. Yeah. Air, absolutely. Breathing, breath, using our air. What else? Vibration. I love that word. Thank you. I'm going to talk about that. Articulation. The word I prefer is pronunciation, and we'll get into why, but yes, articulation is the common vernacular that we all kind of have adopted, but I prefer the term pronunciation. We'll talk about that. What else? Flexibilities. If Scott Belk were here, he'd high five you. The lip slur king. What else? Where's the glory in the trumpet?
Sound.
Tone. Thank you. Tone. Absolutely. Tone, sound. But I'm talking about like visceral glory too. What's that thing everybody wants to do? Yeah. High notes and range. That's right. So if you're warming up, you should kind of be covering all of these bases. Now, the question becomes, should you be starting on an E above high C with your warm-up? Probably not. There might be some people who can do that, and I'm very impressed by them. There are, of course, we all know that person who doesn't ever practice and then picks the horn up out of the case and then can play like a D above double C, and you're like, well, okay, I guess I'll go home now. But yeah, so we know those people, but I'm a working trumpet player, and that doesn't work for me. So great. So we have, sorry, I'm going to pull up my notes. So now I'm going to kind of give you the order of how I think these things go in order of importance. So tone, or our sound, that's the number one thing. That's the first thing people judge us on. And I don't mean judge us in a bad way. I mean it, but it's the first thing our audience hears. It's the first thing your teachers hear. You know, and our sound quality tells a teacher just about everything they need to know about how your playing is going. You know, do you have a full quality of sound? If it's too bright, it might sound brittle. If it's too dark, it might sound hollow. You know, I think of great examples of trumpet sounds. I think of people like Doc Severinsen. You know, anybody think Doc's sound isn't absolutely amazing? It's beautiful. It's everything in one trumpet sound. Bud Herseth, one thing in a trumpet sound, everything in one trumpet sound. It's not super bright, it's not super dark, it's not full of mid-range, it's everything. It is a round, pure sound. That's what I go after first thing out of the day. You know, right out of the gate, my first thing is trying to get a round, pure trumpet sound. Some days, that's better than others. Let's be honest, the trumpet is a day-to-day activity. Some days, that tone is there right away. Other days, it takes doing some long tones, doing some Glatt Studies, doing whatever before I'm like, okay, I've, you know, reshaped myself after the abuse I just put myself through last night. So yeah, tone is my number one thing. It's the first thing I'm after. The next thing I would start working on is some flexibility kind of stuff or some technique things. You can think of, I like to separate flexibility and technique because I kind of think about them differently in my own mind. But yeah, so maybe I start with some technique things, some Clark 1s, Clark 2s, you know, things that get the fingers moving a little bit, because we're going to deal with that. That's going to be a thing we're going to do when we play music. Those fingers are going to have to be moving and free. And if our mind is stuck in our fingers, we're on the wrong side of the fence. We're going to have some trouble, okay? So we want to get that stuff out of the way. We want to get everything moving and synchronous. But I do start my day slow with long tones and the lead pipe, which we'll talk about. Sorry, this Face ID. I should just unlock my phone, right? Anybody know how to do that? I have no idea how to do anything. It's that I'm officially at that age where my phone confuses me. That's how you know you're getting old, everybody. All right. Then range, right? Probably one of the last things I do after I do some flexibilities and technique things, I do some range exercises, okay? And I try to make sure I'm expanding that good trumpet sound I've set up all the way across the range of the instrument. I don't want to be loud and blatty in the low register, and I don't want to be thin and pinched in the upper register. I want that same good quality of sound all the way across the horn, period, okay? Now, another thing, I'm going to kind of lump this in with my warm-up, mentality, the way we approach the instrument. How many of you, and just by a show of hands, have picked up your horn, played your first note, and gone, oh, it's going to be that kind of day? We should probably all raise our hands, right? I mean, yesterday. Yeah, yesterday was a perfect example. I had, so sorry, quick backtracking on how I kind of thought about approaching this clinic today. Just in the past 2 weeks, here's what I've done. I played some small group jazz. Then I played with a brass trio, which could not be more opposite, by the way, in my mind. It's like, hey, here's one end of the spectrum, and here's the exact opposite. Both equally difficult, but, you know, and demanding, but they're very different kinds of playing, you know, and the ensemble, the way you approach the ensemble is very different. Then I got to fly out to Las Vegas and do a production style show for the whole weekend. And when I say the whole weekend, I mean we were there from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. just about every day. And most of that time was standing around waiting and then playing cold. Getting there, warming up, you know. You look at my Instagram, I got cool pictures of us warming up at Caesar's Palace. And then I sat for about 6 hours. And then they were like, okay, great, play this really hard Tina Turner medley. And I was like, oh, okay, here we go. Luckily, I had a really great trumpet player and friend of mine, Matthew Anklin, from Cincinnati, Ohio. If you've not heard Matt play, you got to check him out. Playing, so I had somebody to kind of lean on, a much stronger player than me to lean on for those things. But that was great. Then I came back to Cincinnati. And by the way, another thing we'll probably talk about is just the physicality of things. Like I said, I live in northern Louisiana now. It's like the swamp, right? It's always humid. And then I went to the desert where I was like, oh, I can't get enough water. So just environmental things kind of do play a factor in your warm-up. So something to consider. Even when I drive from Louisiana to Texas, you know, on a recruiting trip or something, I go, it's dry over here, way drier, you know? So things that you might consider as well. Then I came back to Cincinnati, and then I did a recording session where I was playing lead trumpet on some sight reading, some arrangements that a trombonist in the area had written. And then, as if that weren't bad enough, then I went back and played that production style show again in Cincinnati last night. That's just a couple of weeks of stuff that I've done. So approaching your warm-up is very important. Like you said, it's getting you ready to play for that day sometimes, and other times it's getting you ready to play for longer periods of time, or to think about things over a longer period of time. So the mentality part, the why you warm up and what you warm up for, that's as important as anything. Both my teachers, Greg Wing and Bill Adam, used to say that playing trumpet's 90% mental. And then it's 9% air and 1% physical. Or I like to say 1% everything else. Because everything else can become a distraction. So we don't want to get into too much of like, oh, my fingers are stiff today. Well, if your fingers are stiff and you're thinking about your stiff fingers, you're probably not thinking about how you sound. And as I said, number one, tone. It's the first thing you're going to hear. So now what I want to do, hey guys, now what I want to do, speaking of Greg Wing, there he is. I had lovely things to say about you. Oh my goodness, all right. Now it's getting serious. The heavy cats are in the room. So now let's talk a little bit about, I'm going to start with the first kind of warm-up that I was talking about. And this is a daily routine that I like to do. It's what I teach my students. It's what was taught to me. It's what was reinforced to me by the great Bill Adam, right? Anybody not know that name? Raise your hand if you're not familiar with Bill Adam. It's totally fine if you're not. That's cool. That's why you're here, right? That's why we come to these things, to learn more. Mr. Adam was hands down one of the most amazing individuals I've ever met. When I began my study with him, he was 91 years old, and he was on it. And he could tell, you could play one note and he'd go, oh boy. Oh, all right, young fella. You know, just, I'll play and you play. And that's what he did. And it was pretty amazing, you know, and it was a very kind of Zen-like thing to be in a room with him. I never left a lesson with Mr. Adam where I didn't feel better than when I walked in. And I had no idea why most of the time. You know, most of the time I just left the room thinking like, this guy does trumpet voodoo. But then I learned there's really no such thing as trumpet voodoo, right? We prepare, we work hard. Those are the things that are going to propel you through a career. So let's talk about that very first thing out of the gate that I like to do. This morning, just because I've been playing some commercial style shows recently, I've been playing a little bit different mouthpiece setup, which I don't think that really factors into a warm-up. That would be a clinic for somebody else to talk about what you might use equipment for. But so the first thing that I usually do is just kind of do this. Yeah, just do that. Blow a little bit of air. We're not after a buzz. Don't worry about that. Just get your air moving through nice and steady. Yeah, sorry I didn't warn you all to get your horns out, mouthpieces out, but all right. So I'm just after that, right? It's hot, moist, relaxed air. That's what I'm after. Okay, good. That's the basic premise. Now, I will say this. You'll notice I didn't buzz. I actually don't really spend any time buzzing my mouthpiece. It's not that I have a particular problem with that, but it really doesn't work for me. It tends, if I do it, tends to make me play really tight and kind of tense, and I start getting tension in weird places in my body. So I kind of don't buzz the mouthpiece simply for the reason that it creates tension in my body, which is the last place I want tension. You know, I kind of let the trumpet do its thing. So now let's talk about playing the lead pipe. How many of you all have played the lead pipe in here? Oh, beautiful. Yeah. Okay. So after a very fundamental pitch, the fundamental pitch is a concert E flat, would be an F if you had the tuning slide in. So yeah, take your tuning slide out, set it down, do whatever you got to do. All right, now I'm going to play, and you just play it right back to me. It's just a long tone, okay? One, two. There it is. Cool, good, good. I've got my first heckler of the day. I thought for sure it would be Justin, but it's Mr. Wing. Okay, so yeah, we're after that fundamental. Let's just do that a few times. I generally do this, just this fundamental one, 4 to 6 times. It just kind of depends on the day, how things are feeling. I do allow for, like I said, I played a really hard gigs this past weekend and last night, and I mean I played hard. So I kind of allow myself this opportunity first thing in the day to like just let things kind of get going naturally. All right, so I'll play again and then you follow. Ah, that's right here. Okay, it's right in front of me. I thought it was you because you have that reverse pipe. Okay, so we're after roughly a concert E flat. Now, so I want to take this moment to kind of address if you're a little low or a little high. That can be dependent upon who's making your horn, what kind of horn you're playing. You know, typically it's going to be right around an E flat, concert E flat. But if you play a reverse pipe, sometimes it's, again, depends on the maker, sometimes it's a little lower than that. You know, or again, depending on the maker, sometimes it's a little higher than that. So all we're trying to do is get right in the center, right in phase with the trumpet, okay? So, I mean, you can check it with the tuner. I don't usually do that. I just kind of play and find the center of the note. So try to find where the center of that lead pipe is, okay? Let's play together so we can get moving a little bit more. 1, 2, ready? Good. Yeah, better. There you go. Yeah. So there are other pitches and sons of pitches that we can play on the lead pipe. There is above that. There's a ninth. Okay, so I'm going to just talk in trumpet pitch. A G, right, and then above that a C, a D, right, and then we can keep going beyond that. I don't do that because I'm not as good as these two guys or that guy right there. So I usually kind of stop right around there, but as I've grown and gotten older, I've actually found it's helpful for me to connect the pitches. So this is kind of what I do next. Everybody want to try that? 1, 2, ready? Sounds like whale calls a little bit, right? Yeah. So let me ask this question. I don't want to berate the lead pipe too much, but why do you think we do the lead pipe and not just the trumpet right away? Because remember before I asked you, yeah, go ahead.
I feel like for me at least, it forces me to use more air. So when
Yep.
that transitions over to the trumpet, I think I'm focusing on a more air first approach rather than a pressure.
Yeah, absolutely. It gets your air moving, and you have a supported airstream then, right? Also, remember when I said, how many of you have picked up the horn and been right away going, oh, it's going to be that kind of day? You just judge your sound right away. Like I said, it's the easiest thing to judge even for a teacher. It tells us just about how everything's going. So kind of to get yourself, again, that mental part of it, right? To get yourself out of judging. I mean, that even if I make that sound really great, it still sounds kind of bad. It's a lead pipe. Doesn't have a bell on it, you know? So I can't really judge the tone quality of it. I can judge, is it centered? Does my air feel supported? And am I blowing through the trumpet? That's really all I can do. You know, and there is a quality of sound maybe that we're after, certainly, but it doesn't really come into play too much until I put the tuning slide back in, and then I hear sort of the fruits of that labor, all right? Let's do that one more time. Let's just do it together. 1, 2, ready? Yeah, good. And then, like I said, there's other pitches above that. Now, the last thing that I normally do is go back to the fundamental E flat one or two times, and I just kind of blow that back out and get centered, because the first long tone I'm going to play is a G. So I kind of just get myself back into that range. So let's play one more back on that fundamental E flat, concert E flat RF. 1, 2, ready? Good. And that just lets me get recentered. Here, sorry, excuse me, everybody. I guess I still feel like I'm in the desert. I don't know how you lived in that climate and didn't get dehydrated all the time. I was drinking 1 liter of water a day.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Cool, so now I move on to doing some long tones. And I do long tones the way that Mr. Wang taught me, the way that Mr. Adam taught him, and then again, the way that Mr. Adam reinforced with me. So I'm going to start on a G, and we're just going to web outward, okay? Let's do about 8 counts each, just to kind of keep them moving, and we'll probably stop. But typically I will cover about an octave in each direction. So I'll start on this G right in the middle of the staff, and I'll play long tones outward to G on top of the staff, and I do play the low F sharp. So, you know, that's about the range I will typically cover. But again, we'll get into talking about the 2 kinds of warm-ups and what we're preparing for. So I'll talk about that after we kind of go through some of these fundamental exercises. What's the goal of a long tone? Tone? Sound? Right? Okay, good. Here we go. So about eight counts each. I'll try to snap through this. We'll see how it goes. 1, 2, ready? Yeah, so I'll play and then you all play back to me. All right? Now, with folks like, you know, Mr. Wang, Ricky Spears, Justin Mabry, Byron, Terry Everson in the audience, I would hesitate to tell them to follow my sound example, or Anson Banks' trumpet sound beautiful, you know. But so I hesitate to tell those folks to follow my sound example. But the goal of doing this, at least when I do this with my students, is hopefully I'm playing with a sound that they can copy. Like I was talking about, that round, full, pure trumpet sound. Not a bunch of highs, not a bunch of lows, just a good round, fundamental trumpet sound. That's all we're after, all right? So the next note I will play for 8 counts is F sharp, and then you play it back to me. get the idea? So refreshing. You know, I think, how many of you are college students? How many of you are in college? There's something really beautiful and refreshing and heartwarming about hearing your first teacher, just hearing their sound again. It never doesn't make me smile. So, anyway, that's just fun. Now, after this, the next exercise I do is Clark 1. How many of you are familiar with Clark 1? All right. This is, by the way, nothing I'm telling you is original at this point. Some of it is maybe my thoughts or the way that I've grown to think about certain things, but all this stuff just comes from Bill Adam right now. That's where it's coming from. And if, like I said, if you aren't familiar with Bill Adam, at the very least you should read his ITG clinic address because it's fantastic. And it does give you some good introspection into the way that he thought. And again, I felt very fortunate to be studying with him when I did, because he was pretty open when I would ask questions like, "But why do you do that?" You know, and I think he was really open with me, and it was very cool to hear him explain some things, particularly if I said, "What did you hear that I did that made you tell me to do that?" Because I knew I was going to be a teacher, and I didn't want to, do my version of his thing. I wanted to know what he thought. So it was a very cool time to study with him. Okay, anyway, so now we're going to do some Clark 1s. I'm going to do them relatively slow, though I am able to play them very, very fast, but I'm going to get into how that's possible. So first, it's just going to be da 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 da. I'll just probably do it 2, maybe 3 times, and then you guys copy, all right? One, 2, ready, go. All right, so this is kind of a me-ism. If you're not practicing with a metronome, you're cheating. Straight up cheating. Okay? I particularly with flexibility though. Right? How many of us play music that's completely out of time? I mean, okay, yeah, maybe a cadenza, but even a cadenza has phrase and shape and tempo. Okay? A really great clinician and fantastic musician, if you've never gotten to hear him, Demondre Thurman. Anybody know that name? Euphonium player. That dude can play. Okay? Now, he made the comment that you can't mess with a thing until you know what the thing is. And what he was talking about was tempo. That you can't mess with, and I think what goes hand in hand with that is there's 2 things in music that are either right or wrong. The rhythm and the time. Tone, pitch, like those are subjective. You know, I mean, if you're playing a major chord, you play the 3rd low. So even if your tuner tells you you're flat, you're technically still right. So even pitch is up for grabs depending on what you're doing. But rhythm and tempo are right or they're wrong, right? So the way that you build speed is A, by starting slow, but also starting in time. The way that I was able to get these things just really cooking was putting a metronome on, and every day when I felt like, okay, I'm doing better, I'd bump it up a click or 2 clicks.
You mind
Heckler. Yeah, all right. How fast I can or how fast I would?
Oh, yeah, you
I kind of knew this was coming. Ish. Today, that's probably about as fast as I would go. Again, like I said, when you judge these things on a day-to-day basis, it's about as fast as I would probably play them today. Until I feel more opened up, then I might just let them fly, because I do have pretty fast fingers. One of the gifts I was given. But like I say, that was systematic work. That wasn't just, hey, I got really fast fingers. That was putting a metronome on and practicing with discipline and attempting to get to that place where they were free. And part of that was also just, like I said, to get my mind out of my fingers. You know, so that was a big part of it. Put the metronome on nice and slow, get my mind out of my fingers and get it into the sound. Okay? And I will tell you this, I remember a very clear lesson when I got to Indiana University. We were allowed to sometimes trade lessons with people in other studios. So I traded a lesson with Nikki Daly and got a lesson with John Rommel, and who's a fantastic trumpet player. And I played a Clark, and he goes, "Boy, that sure is impressive." He said, "Could you play it slow for me?" And I don't know, I can't tell you the last time I'd actually played them slow. And then he goes, "Huh, yeah, they might not be as even as you think they are." And I went, it was a very defeating moment, but also an honest moment, right? And so then what did I do? I went back into the practice room, I bumped my metronome back down, and I went, get them even again. Okay? So that's the point here. Get them even and get your mind out of your fingers and into your sound. That's all we're after. All right, I think the next one we're on is E, unless I skipped something. I don't know. One, two, ready, and. This is our new click. I'm just going to bump up the tempo. Like I said, it's kind of what I would do. And the faster I go, the more repetitions I can add. 1, 2, 3, 1, ready, and. Good. Kind of makes sense. Get the idea of how we're going through this, right? Some lead pipe, some long tones, some Clark ones, the technique part of it. But what's the first concern? Sound. I'm not thinking about 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, open, 1, 2, 1. No. Da 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 da. That's all I'm thinking about. Okay? If you get your thinking in line, I can almost guarantee you, say with 99% certainty, the physical part of the trumpet will come around. But if you start focusing on what your lips or your tongue are doing, you're probably going to get into a little bit of trouble because you're focusing on the wrong things. Okay? You're focusing on the distraction rather than the goal. Anybody ever solve a problem by only thinking about the problem? No. You find the solution by thinking about the solution to the problem. It's the same idea here. Our goal is the sound. We got to think about the sound first. All right. After that, those are kind of the two mainstays in my routine. As I've developed and changed my routine over the years, those things have never changed. Lead pipe, long tones, Clark 1. They're always in my routine. The other current thing that's in my routine next is some Glatt Studies. Anybody familiar with the Harry Glatt Studies? Yeah, so I do some of those. Like number 1, number 2, I think it's number 20, 21, 22? 19, 20, 21. Then I do some of the later ones too. I do about 5 or 6 of those studies every day. They're not that complicated, but I don't necessarily want to get into them. ULM Trumpet Studios routine is available on my website, though, if you want to check it out. Now, I only do one key a day, so I have them laid out from G flat to C, and generally I just pick a key. You know, I don't really worry about, oh, I don't want to play a high E. I play all over the trumpet, so I don't really worry about that. I just kind of pick a key and then we go, and I don't give it too much thought. Now, with my students, sometimes I go, all right, so Monday you start on G, Tuesday you play A flat, Wednesday you play A, and kind of get them to progress so they have some systematic process throughout their week. Or depending on the player, maybe it's they start on C and go down during the week. You know, it all depends on what I'm hearing the student, how I'm evaluating them. Then I do Schlossberg number 6. Anybody familiar with Schlossberg number 6? So I actually do this one, over the years, that order has flipped. I used to do Schlossberg number 6 after Clark 1 and then do Glatt Studies. But I've actually found that if I do Glatt Studies after I do Clark Studies, I just am playing better. And then the Schlossbergs, for some reason, are much more locked in for me usually. All right? So we're going to do these in time again, but they're nice and slow. All right? I'm going to start on a C, and it just goes down to a B. But nothing really changes. I'm just putting one finger down. Keep your mind in the sound. That's it. Here we go. About 2 counts for each one. That's the general idea, right? Keep that sound flat out. Nothing changes. Nothing's different. We're going a half step. It's not a Clark. You know, we're going a half step. Just push a button down, and don't get caught up in thinking about it too much. Hear the sound, play the sound. That's it. Now, after that, what I kind of neglected to talk about a little bit, and the reason that I moved the Glatt Studies ahead is because I found for me that I wasn't doing a lot of pronunciation or articulation earlier in my warm-up or earlier in my routine. After the lead pipe and long tones, I'm warmed up. Probably actually after about 5 long tones, I'm warmed up. I could probably move on to playing music. I don't, because I'm disciplined, and I want to get through this sort of set of fundamental exercises because it's important, and it makes actually going to the music easier later because I've gotten all the stuff out of the way, so I can just get my mind into making a musical phrase. But I moved the Glatt Studies ahead because there's a lot of pronunciation in there, and that's why I started doing them there. Get my mind in the da 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 da, you know, da 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 da. And again, depending on the day, I might do that da 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 da. Just depends. Speed for me, and that where I'm going to put that metronome on any given day is relative to how much I bashed my face in the night before. And in this case, I bashed my face in a lot last night. We were playing on stage with a whole group of high schoolers at the end. It's the loudest thing I've ever been a part of. It was just a wall of sound. I can't imagine how loud it was to the audience, but it was pretty cool. It was a lot of fun. So anyway, yeah, I moved the Glatt Studies there because it allows me to do some pronunciation exercise a little bit earlier in my routine. Okay, but then what I do next is flexibility. All right, what's the other name for flexibility? Lip slurs. Yeah. I prefer the term flexibility. Remember we were talking about terms I prefer? I prefer the term flexibility because I kind of think the term lip slur is a little bit of a misnomer. I mean, yeah, your lips are doing something, but you're not making them do it. They just do it. They do it as a result of hearing the sound and moving your air, and then your lips just kind of go, hey, we go right here now. Hopefully. Some days that's easier than others. All right? But now, another thing that's changed a great deal in my routine as I've gotten older is the kind of flexibilities I do. I love Schlossberg flexibilities, 31, 14, 15. I've kind of developed some little variations that I like to do on those Schlossberg exercises to extend them longer, because that happens in music where we don't get to take our horn off our face and we have to go from the high register to the low register in one breath and things like that. So I have kind of some variations that I like to do on Schlossberg exercises. But another person's book that I love to hate is Scott Belk's Lip Flexibilities books. He's got 2 of them. They're both equally frustrating and equally good for you. But I do genuinely love them. I think that part of that is because the jazz player in me likes interesting harmony, and harmonically they're very interesting, and they progress through very interesting harmonic ideas, you know, instead of just some fundamental things. But for today's clinic, and to talk specifically about this routine, I want to start with Schlossberg number 31. All right, everybody know that one? Da 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 da. We know that one? Okay, cool. I'll play and then you play. Let's play them one at a time. Let's go back and forth. Beautiful. Now we're going to jump ahead to the next partial just for the sake of time. Starting on a C. And so on and so forth, right? And we just keep going through all of those. As I mentioned, there are a bunch more Schlossberg flexibilities that I do that I think are really important. Schlossberg 95 is kind of a flexibility, kind of not. It's like combining maybe the idea of flexibility with major scales. We should all be practicing our scales every day too. That's kind of something that's fundamental. But now let's move on. To kind of get into the next thing that I do is an Ernest Williams exercise. Anybody ever heard the name Ernest Williams? Know who that is? So again, this goes back to being a pronunciation exercise, right? Getting my tongue back into the equation without thinking about it, okay? Bear with me if you don't know this exercise. I'll play it pretty slow. It's really just a major scale exercise. So just try to follow along the best you can. It'll be a G major. We'll start on G major, but just follow along as best you can. It's just a major scale pattern. Try it? Yeah, you do. I know it's early, but come on, let's not be that reticent. Da 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 da. 1, 2, ready? Yeah, good. Okay, F sharp. I'm kidding. There are many of you I know who would be like, yeah, let's do it. That's the jazz musician in me that loves all things in all 12 keys. I just love that. It's such a great challenge to do things like that. Even if you take, so for those of you who aren't used to doing things like this, I will make a suggestion. When you're watching TV, right, I'm actually going to use this example because I just met him. Everybody know who J.K. Simmons is? The actor? Super cool. I just got to meet him in Las Vegas. He's a very cool, like humble, amazing guy. But anyway, so he's on the farmers commercials, right? We are farmers, yum, bum, 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 bum. So why wouldn't you just take we are farmers, bum, 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 and put that through all 12 keys? You know? Why not? I mean, I'm not going to make you do it right now. But take something simple. Take a small, simple cell of music, a little jingle or something, and just start putting it through all 12 keys. I'm telling you, opening up your ears that way is really, really helpful, okay? The last thing I do, like I mentioned, range. We want to cover some range things. So the last thing I do in my routine is actually a range study that Mr. Adam wrote called Expanding Scales. It's not all that complicated. It's a little complicated to get through with a large group of people. But again, suffice it to say, we're covering from the middle of the trumpet up and back down. We always come back to the center of the horn because we want that same good quality of sound all the way across, even across all registers, okay? So I just kind of got you through what I do for me, my routine, right? And as I mentioned, my warm-up is the lead pipe and then some long tones, and then then I'm practicing. My routine is practice. It's active practice. I am involved in it. I am not just going through the motions. There's nothing more dangerous on the trumpet than going through the motions blindly without considering what you're doing, okay? Make sure you stay involved in the sound and what you're doing. Now, the other kind of warm-up, the warm-up we do for the job, okay? And for some of you who are younger or haven't really done a whole bunch out in the real world just yet, you get the job, but then you have to keep the job. That's the trick. Keep the job. And so if I were to just go into everything, for example, the very first Broadway tour that I did was Young Frankenstein. It was a long show, 2 hours and 46 minutes every night. And for those of you who have played it, everything is underscored. There are 8 minutes where there is not music in the entire show. All right? So, and bear in mind that when I was doing this show, it was a bus and truck show. So I was on a bus sometimes for 8 hours. I would get to the theater. I'd have about 20 minutes before sound check. And then we'd sound check, and then I'd have to run and grab dinner, and then I'd come back and we're playing the show. So, what do you do with that time? Like I said, lead pipe and long tones, I'm good. I can start practicing after that. So I had to come up with this, it's not like it just happened right away. It took me a couple of months before I was like, this is what I need to do to be prepared to play my show the way I want consistently every night. Then I did a different show, and that didn't work for that show because the show was different. So I will adjust my warm-up for a show based upon what that show demands. If it's a lot of long extended playing, like Young Frankenstein was, my warm-up reflects what that needs to be, what I need to do to play that way. If it's, I hesitate to say easier show, but a show that's not quite as, face-pounding like Elf, which Ricky Spears here knows quite a bit about, my warm-up is very different because the show's a little bit less demanding. When I did Addams Family, again, that was probably my favorite show to play. But there's some demanding parts. The opening of the show is like 3 tunes back to back, and you're playing like high, loud. I copied Tony Cadlick's solo that he played on Broadway and played that in the end of the opening of the prologue. It's pretty cool. But so that show demanded something different. So I adjust those warm-ups for whatever it is that show demands. All right? But what's the fundamental basis of every warm-up? Sound. Yeah, it's still at the core, it's about a sound. Now, it might be the sound I need to get going for this particular show versus that show, versus when I played with the Bronx Opera. Didn't warm up like I was playing Addams Family. That wouldn't make a lot of sense. So I adjust that warm-up. Now, I'm going to give you all just some things that I like to do that are a little bit different. Anybody familiar with the Arnold Jacobs patterns? Anybody know those? If you don't, you got to check them out. They're really great. And again, they're things that are relatively simple. It's a major scale pattern. It's a major 6 chord. That's all it is, with some fanciness. But that really helps. Everybody knows flow studies, right? Vincent Chikowitz flow studies? Yeah, tone studies. These things are tone studies. So sometimes when I get the horn out, I'll play the lead pipe, and then I start with some really slow Jacobs patterns or some really slow flow studies. Now I also do my flow studies a little bit differently, so let's go through those just for a minute, and then I know we got to go. And I do want to leave just a couple of seconds for questions here at the end. So I do my flow studies, thank you. I do my flow studies a little bit differently, all right? But everybody knows these. I'm going to start on what's called series number 2 of the flow studies, where we cover an octave. Everybody know what I'm talking about? All right. D flat or C sharp? Raise your hand if it's D flat. My people, who's C sharp? I like D flat because 2 5s are in D flat. They're not in C sharp. Yeah, you noticed what I did, right? The flow studies, the Chikowitz flow studies just descend. My next one would be F, then the next one would start on an A. And what note does a flow study start on? The 5th. Thank you, the 5th. The 5th. Think in numbers. Think in numbers about these things. That will help you. If you start thinking about these things and what they are harmonically, surprisingly, if you go take a jazz improv class, you'll be like, hey, I kind of think this way already. That's really helpful. All right. I did have a couple of other things I wanted to cover. Now, so again, the warm-up after that, like I said, might be flow studies. It might be Jacobs patterns. Then I'm going to play some technical things. Sometimes it's just 2-octave chromatic scales, right? 2-octave chromatic scales from the Arbin book. I don't remember what page, but I could open to it and I can visually see it. Then I would probably do some lip flexibilities. I do like some of the flexibilities out of the Flexus book. I don't do them the way the Flexus book tells me to do them because I'm not an isometric hog. But I do like to do some of those flexibilities because they keep you, they kind of keep the horn on your face just a little bit longer. So I do like some of the flexibility exercises out of the Flexus book. And then as I mentioned before, Scott Belk's flexibility book, I have some flexibility studies out of there that I really like, that I feel like really help me get things like slotted and I feel loose and like my sound is nice and free. So check out Scott's book if you haven't. And then check out the Flexus book, but don't read it. I say the same thing about the Feek book. Feek flexibilities are amazing, but don't read the front of the Feek book. Because I remember when I was in my undergrad, I read the front of the Feek book, and I got really discouraged that maybe I was the player that shouldn't be encouraged. Because I wasn't Mr. Wing will tell you, I was not a very good trumpet player when I came into my undergrad. I had to work really, really hard to get even just a little bit of ability. So again, that goes back to that idea of discipline. Yeah, and then again, another thing that's a staple, the beginning of my routine, lead pipe, long tones, Clark. The end of my routine always has been and always will be expanding scales. What happens in the middle is depending upon what I'm trying to develop. There was a period of time when I was studying with Mr. Adam where I didn't play any Schlossberg. All I played was Feek studies. That's all he wanted me doing, was theek flexibility. And it was great. Really, it really helped me kind of free some things up. So those things are you can change them, but hopefully if you're doing some of this Bill Adams stuff, you're working with a dedicated Bill Adams teacher, and they can help guide you along that path. I think that's really important to understanding what Mr. Adam was all about. Getting with somebody like a Carl Sievers, a Greg Wing, an Anson Banks, you know, and really working with them in a dedicated way. Cool. Well, we're out of time, but I do want to leave this last 2 minutes open for any questions. Are there any questions about anything we've talked about? Yeah.
Can you give an example of your 20-minute sound check routine?
Yeah, so kind of what I went through. So I would do that lead. I'd start with the lead pipe. I'd blow. I probably wouldn't do it as long as I would when I'm getting ready to play like my routine. Might blow it 5-6 times. Then I'm either doing flow studies or Jacob's patterns or something that's a long tone exercise that moves a little quicker. Lets me get across the range of the instrument a little bit faster. Major scales and thirds, Bob Baca thing, I like that a lot to help me get through the registers a little bit quicker, but they're slow. They're slow tone studies. That's the other reason I do them, is I'm focusing on the sound first. Then I would go and probably play some Clark 1s or Clark 2s. Again, just depends what the show demands. Then I'm going to do flexibility. Then I'm going to play expanding scales. And I got to do that stuff pretty quick. And I do try to rest as long as I play. But when you have 20 minutes, it's a little bit tougher. It is a little bit tougher to get that in, but I try to rest. I try to make sure I'm giving myself time to recover a little bit. That's really important. Good question though. Does that kind of answer it for you? Yeah. Other questions? Great. I've answered everything. You guys are ready to conquer the world, right? Again, my name is Eric Siereveld. Thank you so much for coming today, and enjoy the rest of your time here at NTC.